Hey, and welcome to episode number 103 of The Brave Widow Show. Today, I talk with Rebecca, but before we dive into Rebecca's story, I've been getting a lot of questions about some of the things that are happening at the Brave Widow community, and I want to break down some answers for you. So, one of the questions I've been getting recently is around the difference between one-on-one coaching and the actual Brave Widow membership community. The main difference between one-on-one coaching and the membership community is the speed at which you can implement strategies and tools and move forward. With one-on-one coaching, you meet on a routine basis with me as your coach. I work with you on a customizable coaching plan to help you take your next steps forward, to move through grief, and to start building a life that you are happy with, that you're content with, that you actually wake up and enjoy living again. Now, because widows find us in all kinds of different stages, that plan is going to look different for each and every individual person. In the membership community, we also teach widows how to take that next step in moving forward. In the membership community, you have access to a variety of courses. So, if you're interested in learning how to make friends, there's a course for that. If you're interested in how to get unstuck and to get past this feeling of stuck, there's a course and a workshop for that. If you're interested in dating, there's also a course for that. We also have calls throughout the month to help connect with other widows, to learn more about each other, to support each other, and to celebrate successes. And we have calls where you'll learn about different educational topics. The membership community is a great place to start if you're not ready to commit to one-on-one coaching, or you feel like you need to dip your toe into the water before you actually dive in. Both programs are going to help you move forward. They are going to help you learn how to move through grief, how to take those steps forward to start rebuilding your life, to start building trust and confidence back in yourself and in who you are. And they're going to equip you with the real strategies and skills that you need to enjoy living life again. One-on-one coaching is just going to get you there that much faster. It's the reason I have invested thousands of dollars in coaching for myself. I've worked with multiple coaches, whether it is to prepare for a public speaking event, whether it's to learn how to better present my offers and what I can do for my clients, whether it's how to be a better life coach or a grief coach or to help someone through a particular problem. I work with a variety of coaches because coaching gets you there faster. So, if you're tired of feeling like you're spinning your wheels, you're tired of feeling like you're stuck, you're not moving forward, you're not getting the traction that you want, you're tired of being bombarded with negative thoughts and negative self-talk throughout the day, then you need to be part of the Brave Widow community, either through one-on-one coaching, which, by the way, gives you access to everything in the community, or by joining the membership community itself directly. You can learn more about both of these programs by going to bravewidow.com. All right, let me introduce Rebecca. Rebecca is a 46-year-old widow from Western Massachusetts. She is a clinical social worker and grief counselor. Let's dive into Rebecca's story. Rebecca, welcome to the show and thank you for being willing to share your story.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So I know our audience would love to know more about you and your background, and then we can really dive into your story wherever you'd like to start.
Okay, sounds good. So I right now I live in Western Massachusetts, right outside of Northampton, where there's a bunch of colleges, Smith, UMass Amherst, and I actually was born in Western Massachusetts and then grew up in Northern Virginia and then found my way back here after I graduated graduate school. I got my degree in clinical social work and I knew I wanted to settle in Western Massachusetts. So I did that in 2012 and I moved here and as soon as I did, I got a job And about a year later, that actually is when I met my to be soon wife. And then here I am because I love Western Massachusetts.
Awesome. I may have to visit there. It sounds like a nice place, and I'm totally digging your background with the
I know,
trees.
I realized this is a good advertisement for it, isn't it? It's beautiful.
It is,
Yeah,
yes. Okay. So tell us about like meeting your wife and what it was that you just really liked about her and what drew you guys together.
sure, sure. So what I do as a clinical social worker is I do in-home therapy for families who are struggling with some type of trauma or major transition, often gaining custody of a child or losing custody or struggling with the transition in between. And my wife did some similar work, which was she coordinated the meetings of all the providers that it takes to make sure that these kids are safe. So I was assigned a family, and it's funny because I usually am very, very on time, but I was very late for a meeting one day because there was an unexpected blizzard that had hit Springfield, Massachusetts. So I was really late, and it was freezing, and I was walking up into this apartment, and I walked in and everyone's at the meeting and my wife is running this meeting, and I walk in and she turns to me and she's very unhappy that I'm late to this meeting. And then I have to like walk into the apartment's kitchen, which is like, not big enough to hold 3 people and it's holding 10. And then I had to take off all my winter clothes that were very, very loud. And as soon as I started doing this, she sets down her pen and just stops the meeting. It's like dead silence. And she like looks up at me and she's like, "You're late." And I said, "I'm really sorry." And then she continues on the meeting and we leave. And then I got a text from her maybe a week later, asking me out to dinner. And that's how
What?
it started.
Okay, what happened in that week? Just randomly out of the blue?
Well, I have to say, I was not thinking at all that she was gay, so this was a shock. The social work community is very small, so everyone knows one another. I gathered later that she had asked around about me and etc. And then we had a meeting like a week later and we saw each other and it was like very friendly, and she walked out of the meeting, and then while I was sort of like wrapping up, she sent me a text while she was in the parking lot and said, "Do you want to go to dinner on," it was February 15th, which was the day after Valentine's Day that year. And we went out to dinner, and 3 months later we moved in together. 2 months after that we were engaged, and then a year later we were married.
And what were some of the qualities that you really liked about her other than, sounds like she's a very take charge type of person?
She was, and so was I, and I think neither one of us were or had ever been with anyone similar. We always had sort of like the opposite, but for whatever reason that worked. And I think like both sets of our friends made that observation frequently, is like we always just like we gave each other like that challenge. They both, both of our groups of friends just couldn't believe that we were together in that way either, that that we would ever sort of be challenged like that by someone else. She was such a good person, just such an
Mm.
incredibly decent human being, and that was just true from the start.
Yeah.
It was so evident.
So everything was fast and furious. You are together, you are committed to each other. And how long ago was that? What year was that you were
So we
married?
met at the end of 2013 and were engaged in 2014 and then married in 2015.
All right. And what was life like together?
Amazing. Just absolutely amazing. I think we were so aware of how lucky we were to find each other. I mean, I want to say like mid 30s, right? Um,
Mhm.
approximately 10 years ago, and she was early 40s. And we had both been in long-term relationships, and she actually had a son with someone and who was like the most important human being to her ever. We had lived with people, we had built lives and houses, and we'd done all of this. It's not like this was like, oh, this is a, we'd never done this and it was just like, fantastical. It wasn't like that. We never fought. We never said like one disrespectful word to one another. We so appreciated each other. And that was even, before we found out she was sick. We just
Mm.
we just knew from the start how lucky we were. How lucky we were. And we said it all the time. We said
Oh,
it to each other all the time. It was just like an amazing connection.
oh, it sounds like such a beautiful relationship and time that you had with each other, and that's amazing.
Yep, it was.
So, how long were you able to enjoy this relationship before you ended up learning that she was sick?
Well, unfortunately, 4 months after we were married, my brother died.
Mm.
Um, and that certainly like affected our relationship, but also again, I think made us so grateful for one another. We were married in August of 2015, and we found out she was sick in March of 2019. So I guess 4 years. But I would say I only mentioned my brother dying because those 4 years were certainly impacted by that grief. And she had also lost two siblings herself, one right when we met, and one when she was 25 of the same thing that she ended up dying of.
Mm.
So a lot of our relationship was like love and grief all mixed together.
Okay. And I can't even imagine trying to work through some of those losses. And I'm sure that brought up for her some of her grief as well with her past experience. And then on top of that, learning that she has a similar illness as what her sibling died from. How do you even process all of that?
It has not been easy.
Yeah, that would be, can't even imagine how difficult and hard that must be and how blessed she was to have you there by her side and to walk those steps with her.
And I can't, I would have never survived my brother's death without her. She was so, as she was in every way, just so incredible during that time. I don't know what I would have done without her.
And what was that like as she was, how long was she sick for?
I mean, symptom wise, she like hindsight is 2020. So she was truthfully, she was sick all of 2018, but what we thought was vertigo and what her doctors thought was vertigo, which seems to happen so often with metastatic breast cancer that has spread to the brain. Um, so she was very symptomatic for the beginning of 2018, so much so that she was the most even keeled person you'd ever meet, and she got into this really bizarre like road rage accident in our car, and it was so unlike her. And I just kept asking all these questions how it happened, and it didn't make any sense. And only like a year later, when I saw the police report, did I understand like what was happening. But because the disease had spread to her brain, it was on her frontal lobe. Anger was one of the symptoms, and she just did these really odd things. And then she went to Brazil that summer to see her family, and she called me one night, and she was in agonizing pain because her like lower back hurt, and she was just desperate for any pill that anyone could give her. And this was someone who wouldn't take an aspirin her entire life because she just would not take pills or anything. And she was like just doubled over in pain, and that turned out to be where one of the tumors were. And then uh from the time she got back until March of 2019, she was dizzy and nauseous and just very, very unlike herself until one morning we woke up and I just thought like this is not vertigo. Like I just kept reading about it and I understand that there's sort of like chronic vertigo, but it was still so severe that I said, I think we have to go to the ER. And we walked into the ER and the ER doctor who was there that day just happened to be like right there in the little triage room, and my wife started reporting the symptoms, and you could like see the doctor like put it all together. I'm sure she already knew. And she said, "Come with me." And walked my wife like from the lobby to the CT scan. And it was like less than 15 minutes. And she walked back in and said, "Your wife has a massive tumor on her frontal lobe." I said, "Okay." I guess I was in shock and not like I knew something was very wrong, but you know, that was big. And I said, "Okay, so like what next?" And she said she needs to go down to Bay State and get a full body MRI. And I said, "Okay, I'll drive her." And this doctor like looked at me like I was insane. And she said, "I don't even understand how your wife is walking and talking right now. I'm arranging an ambulance right now because there's a good chance she's going to stop breathing. And I need to be in the ambulance if that happens. Like, you're not taking your wife in a car." And then I guess I started to understand how serious it was. And so she went down in the ambulance and I met her down there and she did the full body MRI. And what has happened so many times is like I knew the results were in and everyone's avoiding us. And I can tell like the more they're avoiding us, the worse it is. And I had just gone through everything I had with my brother. So like it was literally on the same floor my brother died. I knew. And finally I just had a little fit and I was like, I need the results. And they sent, sorry, there's a mosquito. They sent a PA in and she said, unfortunately, like my wife's brain was covered in tumors. And at that point, they gave her about 3 to 6 weeks to live.
How do you even, when you're in that situation, like wrap your mind around what's happening and what they're telling you from a prognosis aspect and what that means for the next few weeks together?
I don't know that there are words to describe that. I do remember thinking when the doctor in the ER and our local ER who had found the original tumor, because the CT scan only picks up, bigger things. So they only saw like one of the tumors. It was the MRI that saw the rest of the brain. I remember her saying this, and I remember thinking in my head, but like my brother just died. This can't be happening. There's no way that I could lose my brother and my wife like this. I really felt like there has to be some mistake. And I think that has been the biggest lesson in grief is like one thing does not spare you from another. And some people will never experience this. And some people will have things 10 times worse than even I have. And there's no explanation or sense to it at all. And to not waste my time on trying to figure out like why that is, because it's not fair at all.
Yeah, and it can cause you to feel like you just need a break. Like
Yep.
you just need one more tragedy not to happen or just have some sense of normalcy when you're faced with so much loss and so much trauma and it just feels like over and over.
Yep.
So what happened going forward from that point, or how many weeks did you end up having together?
So she actually did not never left the hospital at that point. They wanted her to start brain radiation immediately. That was, I mean, even if she lived 3 weeks, that was really the only way she would, continue on. She really was at risk of dying at any moment where the tumors were. And So she did 10 days of full brain radiation, and the idea was that we would meet with her oncologist like a couple weeks later to start the every 3 week treatment that metastatic breast cancer requires, um, and figure out like how we were gonna, you know, move forward. And so she did the 10 days of the whole brain radiation, and it made her so incredibly ill so quickly that she lost the ability to walk within about 5 or 6 days after the brain radiation stopped. And then we missed that first oncology appointment. I called and left a message. And in retrospect, now knowing, having gone through what we went through, knowing I left a message for her oncologist saying we weren't coming and never hearing back is so shocking to me. But nevertheless, um, so we missed that appointment, and she's getting sicker and sicker at home. And until she one morning woke up and like we had I her friends were in town, so like we were getting her to the bathroom sort of like just barely. And until one morning she just refused to go and tried to convince us that she no longer needed to go to the bathroom. And after about 18 hours of not doing that, I realized like she's going to be very sick and her bladder is going to burst. I had to call 911. And uh they came, they brought her back to the ER where she was originally diagnosed, and her oncologist was actually there. And her oncologist walked in and looked at me and said, like, I don't know what it is you want me to do. Like, basically, your wife is dying, and walked out of the room. And it was it was so absolutely terrifying and lonely. Um, but in my gut, even though I could see that my wife was very sick, and I can imagine from an oncologist's view, she was dying, I couldn't believe it. So I actually called my brother's doctor, who works at a hospital in New York, and I called him at 2 o'clock in the morning and begged him to admit her. And he said, send me her records. And I did. And 6 hours later, an ambulance came to drive her down there. She was assigned a new team, and she lived another 2.5 years.
Wow.
Yeah, it was amazing. It was amazing. We were so incredibly lucky to get connected to this team. Her new oncologist was actually from the same town she's from in Brazil. So they had, a very positive connection that was really important for my wife. Um, her neurosurgeon was willing to do a surgery that the neurosurgeon up in Massachusetts was not willing to do, because typically if you have that level of disease, it's not worth it to go in for one tumor when there's, hundreds. But the doctor in New York was willing to take out the biggest one, which is the one that was causing all the problems. So he took that out, and she returned to herself and regained the ability to walk. And we had a good 2.5 years until the last
Wow.
couple months, of course. So it turned out a lot better than we expected. A lot better.
What was that next 2.5 years like? It had to be full of all kinds of emotional ups and downs, of just maybe going through the motions. Like, I can't even imagine what that has to be like being by somebody's side as they're going through that for that period of time.
It was hard. I mean, I will say, I mean, she was so sick, and I mean, she had seizures. She had 1,000 other complications going on at the same time because of the medication, because of the disease, because of the steroids, everything. So I say like things were great, but it's that's so relative because things were great because she was like alive and mostly herself, but like of course life looked very, very different. She was never allowed to walk anywhere alone, not even to the bathroom. She could have a seizure, she could fall. That is for someone who was as fiercely independent as my wife was. She was so patient. She was so patient because I don't know that I would have been able to tolerate that. But I had to. I had to. Because of course the one time I didn't, she fell.
Mm.
And I memorized how many steps it was to every store to see if she could make it. Our life revolved around this illness, of course, but we were also so happy that she was here. Um, and she was just so happy to like be in our home. She loved cooking. She um I know it sounds crazy, but she loved cleaning and taking care of the house. She was so happy that she was still here able to do that, that we spent most of that time, both because how sick she was and that traveling was incredibly difficult. And we did sometimes when she was well. It's not like we were completely housebound, but most of the time we spent in our home that she wasn't in treatment. Um, but we had such a good time doing that. We had such a good time doing that.
Mm.
I think, the part that she helped me with my brother was trying to find some sort of purpose in the grief and also understanding like I can like kick and scream all I want that she's dying. That's not going to change the fact that she's dying. I have a choice. I can either like spend that time with her or wasting it with with feelings that it just doesn't matter. And she was so good at like helping me see that like I had this time to spend with her. And it really was someone like me to be able to like live in the moment. Like if you knew me before you, it's like I actually don't know how I did. But she was so good at helping me do that.
Mm. What a beautiful gift having those additional years together.
It
And
wasn't
yeah, yeah.
was a good.
Um, what would you tell someone who's maybe in that situation now? Maybe their spouse or their partner just received a terminal diagnosis. Maybe they're the caregiver just trying to even make sense of what's happening and what the future looks like, or maybe they have some potentially extended time together. Like, what would you say to that person?
When we that day we did find out that she was sick, and I sort of realized that we were gonna have to live in this place where it's like moment to moment and you either enjoy it or you don't. And the other part of her request was for the most part, of course, a few people here and there were an exception. For the most part, people did not understand that she was dying. They thought somehow that she was going to survive this. So both of those requests were very difficult for me, but I don't have one regret about honoring that. I mean,
Well,
perhaps there's questions that I won't have answered, and I can imagine that her friends and family struggle with that even more because they knew nothing, and I at least lived with her every day. It's not what I would have planned for an end of life, but I'm so glad I did that. That I was true to her request, even though it was really painful for me to do.
and I know that it has to be really heavy where you're the caregiver, you're the person that's by her side, you're the one like picking up the pieces of everything. And at times, a lot of the focus is on the person with the terminal diagnosis and the person who's sick and struggling. and you can feel very unseen or just burnt out or just almost hollow from a certain perspective. Is there anything that you did that was helpful in keeping you going, or something you wish you did differently that would have kept you feeling just in a better place while you were undergoing that?
I mean, relationships change after grief, particularly when it's like this. And I was sort of already prepared for that because I had experienced it with my brother, and I saw how different family and friends responded. So I was much more prepared for that. And I think for me, what I've realized, and maybe this isn't true for everyone, the people that I feel the most connected and safe with right now are people who have experienced a similar loss. And that's not to say that I haven't had some close friends be really amazing, but it's very, very different. It's very different. I think like when you watch someone suffer, it changes you forever.
Mm.
And until you know what that means, it's hard to relate to. And with people sort of like in the same boat, you don't even have to have that conversation.
Yeah, you don't have to explain it.
Yep. So, when people die from a disease in the brain, that typically comes with, X, Y, and Z that are horrible. So it is really helpful to be able to talk to other people who understand what that looked like. So I guess my advice is that it is a particular connection when you meet people in the same grief boat.
It is. I think it's so important to have a really supportive community around you who understand in their own way what you've gone through, and you can just talk about it and not have to explain what that means and explain how it's changed you.
Yep.
And I think sometimes it's good to have people around you that don't know how you were before, because then they're not trying to compare you
So
to how you
true.
were.
I never thought about
Yeah.
that until you said that. I wonder if that's some of it. They don't have anything to compare it with. It's so true.
Yeah. They're not waiting for you to go back to normal.
Exactly.
That's definitely
Yeah.
been helpful. Well, Rebecca, thank you so much for coming and sharing your story. Is there any last words of wisdom or any last words of encouragement that you would give to other widows who have a similar experience?
I hate to say because it's so cliche to say because this is what they say to you in the beginning is like somehow it does get better. And I would say that is true. It's just it takes time. It takes time. And not to have I think, often people have these expectations of what a year looks like, what 2 years looks like, and I can tell you that this third year has been the most difficult
Mm.
for different reasons, but that it's hard to predict what part is going to be easy, what part is going to be hard. It's not linear. Um, but it sort of, it slowly does get better.
Yeah. Yes. And I think even though it feels cliche, it's meant out of a way to give people hope to not give up, that there is that light at the end of the tunnel. So thank you for just being so open and willing to share as much as you did about your story. And I know that it will resonate and help encourage other widows that are out there.
Thank you.
Are you a widow who feels disconnected? Do you feel like you're stuck or even going backwards in your grief? Widowhood can be lonely and isolating, but it doesn't have to be. Join us in the Brave Widow membership community and connect. We teach widows how to find hope, heal their heart, and dream again for the future. Find your purpose and create a life you love today. Go to bravewidow.com to get started.